Okay. Let's do this one. All right, guys, thanks so much for joining this morning. Some of you have seen this before because it's something that I've trained on in the Market Center before, but I wanted to go over some of the essential, pun intended, no, some of the essential templates that I've used over the years in my business, and it was something that very much so allowed me to go faster and serve my clients more efficiently. And me just remind myself to do a better job. So I am a huge color person when it comes, like I enjoy my templates, and then I ended up taking it to another level to where everything in my business was kind of color coordinated. So we're going to go through kind of buyer, seller, some stuff is separated out, buyer and seller. And so for all of my buyer stuff, I always used green, a green form. And then anything that referenced a seller, I used an orange form. That continued on. I had a board in which I tracked all of my potential, all my prospects, and then all of my active clients. And then as they went through and went pending and then through to closing, I kind of had a board that I tracked stuff on. So I would take and make an orange note card for those seller contacts or those seller, now what we call opportunities, and I had green ones for buyers. So again, it was like kind of on the tops of my folders. If it was a seller client, it had an orange label. I was a little into my colors, but the reason that the forms were really important, that they were a different color, is often when I would go to a listing presentation, it was something that I would do before I had an admin, but once I had an admin, she was trained or to stick it in so I'd have a manila folder to go out on my listing appointment. I would ask her to insert both all of the forms in the colors. And it was just really nice because as I'm going through comps and such, it was really easy for me at that point to find in that folder. And often, like, you know, there's a gazillion papers in these folders as you continue on in a relationship with a buyer or a seller. It was always really easy for me to find, hey, where did I take notes on exactly what it is that was important to them on the purchase of their new house? Oh, it was really, they have 2 dogs and 2 Labradoodles that are in a fenced-in backyard. It was easy for me to reference that quickly when I was out and about showing with them, and I couldn't remember what exactly was it that there was one school district in this area, this school in this area, one elementary school that they really wanted to avoid. Which one was that again? It was easy for me to go back and reference those. So that was why and it sounds really silly, but when you're kind of in that, like, especially, well, you guys are all, Andy and Chris are both veterans in this, but it was a way for me to be able to calmly reach down, pull that out and say, okay, now we're going to talk about the new house at a listing presentation and be taking notes in an organized fashion so that when we got back and 3 weeks later, we're actually starting to look, I had all my notes kind of gathered together. So this is the buyer lead form that I came up with, and this is the seller one. So let me see if I can take my zoom out just a little bit. So possibly it'll be a little easier for you to see. They are very similar, as you can see. So there's a few places that I made a couple changes, but they're kind of similar in such. I kept in my office a stack of green ones and orange ones, and I had those ready at all times so that when I got a phone call of someone that said, hey, my friend said I should call you and talk about purchasing a property, it was really easy for me to go grab a green form and start talking to them. I also carried around green and orange blank forms. And again, I am a paper person. I think that I will go to my grave as a paper person, whether I'm going to the grocery store or I'm working with clients. There's something about writing it down and having something in front of me that made it easier for me to make sure I was hitting all of the important questions and showing that I was really paying attention and gathering the information so I could serve them better. I also had these forms at open houses, and I will tell you that that was always a technique that often would catch people off guard, because as I, had established a relation, a connection with somebody in an open house, and I could tell that like they were kind of into working with me. When I pulled out a green form and I started taking notes, the level that we're going to walk through on this, and I was asking the questions that I'm going to walk through and kind of talk to you about here. you could tell that they were like, wow, she is super organized and is really paying attention and really cares. And it helped kind of cement that connection and made it that much easier for me to kind of really capture that lead at an open house. And again, when I'm driving around in my car and I got a random phone call from someone saying, hey, would you come look at selling our house? It was a way for me to gather and quickly be reminded of what questions I should be asking so that I was able to get the most amount of information out of that phone call. And again, like speed things up, right? I don't know about many of you in the business. Were times where I was driving in my car and I would get a phone call and they'd say, okay, we want to list our house. And I'd talk to them for a bit and then we'd hang up the phone and I'd be like, man, I didn't ask them this, and this, because it was hard for me at the top of my head in the middle of everything else I was doing to remember what is it that I should be asking them. So I would say that there's great value in that. But so again, the forms, this is interesting to do. Normally I would hand the forms out. They look really, really pretty and are nicely put together when printed. But anyhow, so the buyer lead form, here at the top, I would put a receive date and initial contact date. The reason, guys, that I felt like that was always important is oftentimes somebody would reach out to me, we'd have a conversation, and then maybe they would need to save a little bit more money before they purchase something. Or, you know, it was a way for me to kind of capture to when I initially started working with someone. And often it was really interesting when we'd go to closing, they'd look at that date and it was 9 months prior. It was kind of an interesting, but it was a way too for me to just kind of capture when the lead came in. I would keep notes in this contact record field. Obviously name, email, phone number, capture that information if I didn't already have it. Lead property. So the purpose of this box was so that I could capture what property they called me on. This was really helpful with sign calls or when someone called and said, hey, we saw this house that we really, really liked. We've been kicking around the idea of purchasing something, but here's the address of the one we really liked. It would give me the ability, especially with sign calls, to see that if that house was turnkey and everything was completely done in it, and that gave me an idea of, oh, okay, these people might be more into a turnkey, but it was a good reference of where did they start and what house brought them in. If it was a sign call, it also let me know, help me capture kind of what was the lead that got them, to me. So that was what I kind of used this lead property box for. And guys, please feel free to interject and let me know if you've got any questions. Under the client interest kind of section here, we had the obvious bed, bath, garage, basement. In the bedroom section though, it wasn't often I would put in here 3+ or 3+4 ideally. I often would also include how are they going to use those bedrooms. So that's where sometimes I would write in master, office, guest room, if it was, a first-time home buyer, or I would include that, they really needed to have 4 bedrooms, ideally 5, but if there was an office, that would be okay. I would make those notes in that small space, but that was a space that I would kind of keep some notes that were important. The reason that I included floor plan too, because often that would turn to the next thing, the question I would ask is what level do you want the master bedroom on? Is it important to you that all the bedrooms are on the same floor, especially if I was working with a younger family that maybe had small children? But that was a common question where I'd say, is it important that they're all on the, what floor would you like your master on? And that would give me an idea too, is should we, if they were to say, then there were some that were like, absolutely, positively have to have my master bedroom on the same level as my kids, then I knew that we really only needed to be looking at 2 stories. And often I would take a second to just breathe and communicate to them like, okay, so we really need to focus in on 2 stories. I'll be sure to, or ranches, but I'll be sure to include just those on your search. Another floor plan one that was often a good quick win and a good laugh sometimes too, were to say, how do you feel about split levels? Especially if I kind of had an idea from that lead property about where they were kind of looking and what price range that they were kind of looking at. And I'd get a good chuckle because I'd say people either love them or they hate them. And there was often times where, or there were times where people would say, oh my gosh, no, I don't want to live in a split level. And then I could make that note there. In the bathrooms, I would always then clarify. So how many bathrooms are you interested in? Again, it would be, okay, well, we want 2 bathrooms. Well, follow-up question to that was often, does it two showers, 2 bathtubs, is that necessary? Or would a full bath and then just a half bath work for you, to have clarification there? Garage, that's where often people would say, oh my gosh, we want a 3-car garage, and then maybe their budget wouldn't take that into consideration. But I often, again, as you guys know, I've worked a lot in the Brookside area, where asking them in that garage section if it was important that it was attached, or if a shared drive was going to be an issue or something to consider. That was something I'd also capture in that garage area. When it came to basement, it was a question of, do you have to have a basement? So were slabs something that we just needed to completely remove? And often people would say, absolutely need to have a basement. And sometimes they would say, it's really important that we have a finished basement or finishable basement. So that was something I would put in that field. I'm going to skip down here to backyard. In the backyard section, I would often ask about pets. So is it important we have a fenced in backyard for any pets that you might have? And I would include those kind of here. If privacy was a big deal and they wanted to back the woods or something, I would include that. Area, school districts. So I would often insert if there were specific areas that they were wanting to look in, whether that be Parkville or Overland Park or Olathe, or if there were school districts that they were really wanting to focus in on, and they knew that already. Okay, another one that kind of sometimes was one that I think really caught people off guard, or gave them a sense of, I really was trying to get to know what their needs were and what it was that they were wanting in a home, is when I would ask them about project level. And the way that I would usually approach that is to say, did you have an idea of what kind of a project level you were willing to take on with this home? And kind of be quiet, because sometimes they, and then I'd say, well, I mean, like, talk to me about, like, are we okay with painting rooms if they needed paint, or peeling wallpaper off, or you just stop me whenever, whenever you kind of reach a comfort level. Are we okay with, like, remodeling a bathroom? Or do we want to take out walls? And more often than not, people would stop you and be like, I think that we could, like, paint a few things, but, like, we know, like, that's probably where, unless it was absolutely perfect, we do not want to redo a bathroom or take out walls. And other people would be like, actually, I'm glad you asked that, because I think that, like, my husband and I are both really people that like things a certain way. And we really would prefer to get something and make it our own. So we kind of would prefer, like, maybe something that had a little bit more of a project in it, that we could build up some equity with just doing some, sweat equity. So that was kind of a good win, and a good place for me to kind of know what the feel was for them there. In this other box, I often included stuff like mother-in-law needs to, need to have room for mother-in-law to come stay, or where they would work, and if that was important. So that was kind of like a catch-all for all of the other questions and things that would be important. Husband loves to cook, gas stove is super important, that kind of a thing. No busy streets, that kind of a thing I would capture there. Any questions there? Okay, going over to this section here. It was another one that often when you would get that random phone call in the car and you're trying to take down notes, that you can quickly get them started on a search. Again, because the quicker you can gather the most amount of information and get the best suited properties to somebody, the faster you're going to be able to help get them under contract and assist with moving on to additional business for yourself. But moving date. So that would be, did you have an idea of when you wanted to have keys in your hand? And that would be often what I would explain, because a lot of times when you'd say, when did you want to move? That was not a question that people always understood. And we talked about how you kind of back into that date, but moving date. And then if they were leasing, is there an expiration date on their lease? So was there a date in which on their lease that they needed to be out? And often to clarify, because people would say, oh yeah, my lease is up in June. Well, clarifying if the lease was up June 1st or the end of June was always important too, right? Because that 30 days could be really, really important in their search efforts. I also included here, why are they moving? So if it was they were wanting to relocate and they needed more space, that kind of a thing. And I would include that kind of as a why. And this next section, this is really more about the way that they were going to pay for the property. So I would check a box if they were financing it, if they were pre-approved. I'm sorry, so here at the top, financing or paying cash. They were pre-approved. If they were not pre-approved, I would mark if I had sent them to the lender already. If they had had a lender already selected, or at the time, I'd update this later with the lender that they were working with. I'd talk through and ask them if they had a consideration or if they put thought into what type of loan they wanted to get. And that's when we'd have conversations if they weren't real sure about whether it was an FHA loan, a conventional loan. Oh, we would probably in this price range be looking more at a jumbo loan, and have a little bit of a conversation about that. Sometimes people wouldn't know necessarily what their price range was. And so these two would kind of work together. I'd say, have you gotten on and done some calculators, and do you have an idea of how much you want to spend? And sometimes people would know and sometimes I wouldn't. If I said, do you have a better idea of kind of what your comfort level is on monthly payment? I would fill in that line. Down here in the bottom section of this first page, so the cutoff page for this one was kind of right about here. I would mark what marketing material I'd sent to them or provided them. So if it was someone I met at an open house and I'd already provided them the process flow, I would mark that. If I'd sent them stuff about pre-approval, given them a buyer's packet, set up an auto email for them. So if I'd already gone through that process, I would mark that I'd already done that and what date. And then if I'd set up a safe search, lender information, that kind of stuff, I would kind of mark that there. I'd put these boxes down here so I could put what my next action was and who it was assigned to. That wasn't something that got a ton of use over the years, guys, if I'm completely honest. On the back of each of these, it just stated who was a person who referred them. And then for me to send a thank you card to the referring person, and then a nice to meet you card to the clients. So that was the buyer form. As I said, our seller one is pretty darn similar. But any questions before we move on to the seller one, kind of on that buyer one? Okay. So the seller contact, this one I have obviously made some modifications over the years too. I had made lines for both email and phone number for both clients. And then I had here for the legal name, because there's lots of times where I'd go meet with a Katie, and Katie was really not, Katie legally, her name was Catherine. And I needed to know that for listing paperwork, which I could pull off of the tax record and such. But next to email and phone number, I often would put the initial of the homeowner for each of those. So if the husband was a Jake, I'd put a J. And if the wife was Cindy, I'd put a C next to email, and same with phone number. Little tips and tricks. Here is their property address that I would just capture what their property address was, and then their list price expectations if they had those. This is similar to just as we discussed before. Same with moving date and why they were moving. As I went through beds and bathrooms, again, I would often, because you got those phone calls sometimes that was random, and or you'd already done a little bit of homework because it was an email, but their house wasn't in the MLS. I don't know if you guys remember those days, but we had for a while there. MLS only went back so many years. But I would ask those questions about bedrooms, and if I didn't have that information from the MLS, I would kind of try to get a feel for what floor plan it was. With the bathroom, as a seller, I often would use that as an opportunity, you guys, to ask them, tell me a little bit more about your bathrooms. Have those been updated? What do they look and feel like? And a lot of people are pretty darn honest and willing to be pretty honest and open about their bathrooms. Same thing with kitchen. So I would kind of say, hey, tell me a little bit about your kitchen. And we've all had those sellers too that are like, oh my, yeah, so we updated the kitchen. It's really nice and it has granite and this and that. And then you got there and they updated it like 14 years ago when granite first got invented. But no, it was often, many people had a really good feel where they would say, we don't have the white kitchen that everybody wants right now, but we did redo it, or we haven't really done anything to the kitchen since we bought it. It's still got, the original countertops and, white appliances, and it probably might be an area that we should invest a little bit of money in. Maybe we can talk about when you come. Same with the basement. We would just talk about if they'd finished that or made any improvements down there. Garage. And then same with backyard. There was a fence, I was making note of that, just so that when I was running my comps and I had a better idea if it was private and back to woods, I'd know how to approach that. And then again, the updates question. So overall, I'd say, okay, that's when you kind of open it up for people and say, tell me about the updates that you've made. And that's when they maybe would rattle off like, oh, we got new windows and we redid the hardwood floors and HVAC. We replaced the HVAC 17 years ago. And we just did the, furnace then. And then we did the AC 2 years ago, but they were giving me those kinds of updates too during those times. Often when they were answering that update question, I was getting a lot of information from them too about what they, what they're, what they felt like about those updates. So I mean that if they're rattling off a furnace as like, we made an update, we put it 17 years ago, we got a new furnace and I put a 50-year roof on it 12 years ago and that kind of a thing, then I had a really good feeling that they were very, maybe how to approach the appointment when I got there too. So from there, I would also kind of ask and walk into that question of, do you have a loan on the property or are you, or is that something that, you've got paid off, and have that kind of conversation with them, and kind of step into that gently. Because a lot of times people might be a little bit hesitant. I was surprised, guys, when you just rip the Band-Aid off and ask the question, how many people are like, yeah, we owe like, I think we owe $212 on it, We've been paying on it for a number of years. I think we're down to $212 on it. And they would just straight up tell you what they owe. Down here in this lower section is kind of often, if I had the ability to do a little homework ahead of time, I would. This would be where I would put the date that they purchased it, how much they paid it, what it was listed for in the MLS. And then I would record here in the bottom what my appointment was scheduled for, and then when I was going to deliver the listing packet. And the reason for that, I don't know about how many of you all, but often, especially if you're in the car, you're caught off guard or something of the sort, I really needed to immediately write down because often you're kind of talking through, well, I could come Wednesday night, or I could come Thursday afternoon at like 2 or Friday at 1, and kind of, and like writing down exactly what is it that we nailed, like we landed on, was important. This was also important in time as I had an admin, because these forms were, especially this orange one, was one that it was really easy for me to then turn this into handing it to my admin and saying, go ahead and go do the listing presentation. I took this form when I had and used it additionally, because I was just so, after, 6 years of using it, I was really like used to using it. So when I had an admin and she was doing my listing presentations, I would then add up at the top right corner what the price range was on the estimated proceeds worksheet that I wanted her to draft for me. And then I also would write the number of comps I put in a cart and the name of the cart for the client, so that my admin could go in and just produce the all of the listing paperwork and all of the stuff for the listing presentation completely and totally based on this orange form. So that was super helpful. Okay, any questions on that? Okay, on the back, I had where I use this from time to time with communications with admins to state, do I have a copy of the old MLS printout in my folder? I really liked having that at a listing presentation, partly so that when people would go, gosh, like how much did we pay for it? I could be like, oh, I've got it right here. You guys paid $275 and the asking price was $285. It'd been on the market for 67 days. Also the MLS tax sheet, you can tell there's a little dated because that's changed in the MLS a little bit. And then if an Outlook contact had already been created. So if I didn't have an Outlook contact already created, my admin was to go in and create one in my Outlook for me. So that was a way that I communicated with her to be able to do that. Questions over the years that I've learned and picked up from some great listing agents were, how did you hear about us? Because that's always kind of a good way to make sure you know where your leads are coming from. If I came and we met on Saturday at 1 o'clock, are you guys prepared to list at that time? Was a question that was good, often good to ask, just to say if they're going, because I don't know how about you guys, many times in the business, many years, people would call me and be like, hey, yeah, can we get together? I think we're looking at getting our house ready to sell it. And I'd be like, oh my gosh, sure, yes, let me, I'm gonna just move my entire schedule around, turn my life upside down, and I will be there because like, oh, I'm so excited, a listing presentation, like a listing appointment. And then I'd get to that listing appointment after turning my life upside down, And they'd go, yeah, I think that like maybe in the fall we'll want to put it on the market or maybe next spring. And I'd be so frustrated with myself because I didn't take the 2 seconds to ask the question of, are you prepared to list right now? Had I known that, I probably would have been just fine, especially if it was a referral from someone else, to meet with them at a time that was more convenient for myself and my family. Another question would be possible competition. So there was times where are you going to be interviewing other agents or what was your process for that? And just getting an idea of whether or not you were going to be competing. Because if you were, to make sure that you were going prepared with the scripts to highlight why you were the agent that they should be working with. Have you ever thought about selling it yourself? So both these two questions were always ones that it took a little more guts to ask, because it's like, well, I don't want to open up if they weren't thinking about selling it themselves to suggest that they maybe think about listing it themselves. However, I don't know if there's been times that you've shown up to a listing presentation and you were caught off guard because you went through the whole house with them, told them what they maybe should do, sat down and were for sure that they were listing with you, went over the comps and such. And then you're going, okay, so can I get my stager ready to come on out? And they go, well, we were going to give it a shot ourselves first. And you're like, first of all, I'm not prepared with any of those scripts to really, truly have a skilled conversation with you. And B, like, I just gave away the farm. Like, I just told you everything you needed to know. So, some of the other veterans would probably be able to chime in and say, and I'd ask others on their opinions. For sale by owners, those are often, they either are going to be a for sale, considering for sale by owner or not considering for sale by owner. I don't think anyone that wasn't going to do it, wasn't considering it before, aren't going to be swayed greatly by you asking the question. And those that were kind of maybe possibly thinking about it, but really not, it's easier to be prepared and have a skilled conversation and then just squash it in that listing presentation if you're prepared, than not being prepared for it. So will there be any other decision makers at the listing appointment? So that was an important one, because there's often times where if you don't clarify that both decision makers, so if it's a home owned by two people, husband and wife are both going to be there, that you show up and you're spending your Thursday night at someone's house doing a listing presentation only to find out the husband's not there. And I will tell you, there are some families in which maybe one party can handle all of the financial, those kinds of transactions for the family, and the husband's going to just sign off on it or whatever, because that's how their relationship's set up. Asking that question and being able to get that clarity from the get-go. If they say, well, I mean, Josh is really just good with, he's really busy with work, we're relocating, and with him having to get settled with his new position and wrap up everything here, I'm really just handling the sales. So it'll just be me here on Thursday night, but no, like, Josh is in on it. We have to divide and conquer right now. Now the times, it's happened before where I went to meet with Danielle and Mike wasn't there, and Mike didn't want to sell. And I just wasted my Thursday night going and chit-chatting with Danielle because they weren't actually serious about selling. And so being sure that both decision makers there, super important. And then I had a low and a high. So often if you would ask people, what was do you have a range in which you're interested in selling it for, you think that it might be worth, a lot of times they may very well give that to you. And then, do you have any questions before I arrive? And that would be kind of where I would get some, if there's additional things I needed to prepare for. So that is the seller form that I'd kind of go through. I should have brought up some water, guys. I'm like, I love to talk, and it's killing me to be sitting down and doing these. I really need to get a standing desk going. Okay. The next form that was also one that I would include in my folder when I go out to list a property would be yellow. It was also printed on cardstock because I would often be writing on it at the appointment. And I liked that it was a little bit more durable. So two-sided as well. The front side was super simple, and the page break on that was like here. And so it's hard to tell, but it's just like this big box and then a bunch of open space. And the way that I would use this is I would have my folder or my iPad, and I would have this out. And again, it's yellow, so it's easy for me to find in the folder later for other tasks that I use it for. But also, I guess it brought some attention to it for my clients, where again, they're like, this chick is crazy in the best way, and she's taking lots of notes and she's paying attention. So the purpose of this form was, as we walked through the property, because I would walk through it with the sellers, they would be pointing out different things that would maybe be, so they're pointing out multiple things, right? As you walk through, they're pointing out the, all of the like things that okay, so the new windows, and then we did get the wood blinds after we moved in. And they're telling me these things, right? And about the new AC they put in 2 years ago. Also, and I'm writing all of these things kind of in this section and down here. So I'm making notes as we walk through the property of all those things that are upgrades and such that they can only tell me about, that I can't see with my own 2 eyes. I'm also feverishly writing in these sections different things that I'm going to turn into feature cards when I list the property and put it on the market. And so I'm writing things down in this section like 5 burner gas stove, under cabinet lighting, pull out shelves in the kitchen. Because if I didn't put a note, somebody may not open those underneath cabinets and realize that there's pull out shelves that those sellers have paid, you know, that's a nice feature, that's an upgrade. I would put in there high ceilings, or if they're, I mean, just all of those little things I was walking through, I was taking and making notes. If I was in a new construction neighborhood that they had bought a home maybe 4 years ago and that we were going to be competing with new construction, I was writing every single upgrade to make sure that they were completely aware of what those upgrades were. So if there was a ceiling fan in every bedroom, and even on older homes, if there was a ceiling fan in every bedroom, I made a note of that because I wanted to make sure that I was pointing that out to buyers as they came through. And I think that that was also a huge selling point to my clients and why they referred me to other people, because they were like, wow, she made sure she showed off every little piece of my home to try to get the most amount of money for us. But I made all of those notes down and all across the side. And as feverishly writing it, I was always so very, very grateful for this when it did come time to list and I needed to make those feature cards, because then I just pulled it out and I would put gas logs, and I would put, you know, huge pantry, and, you know, those, and like, honestly, like in some homes, you do need to point out in some price ranges that it has a pantry because the other 3 didn't. And that might be what helps sell your house or helps them, distracts them from other things. But anyhow, so that was the point of this big blank area. Now, this lovely box here was where I would capture when the homeowner was asking questions like, do you have a plumber? So the master bathroom, the sink on the right, kind of, it drains really slow, but, and I think there might be a leak or something with it. So do you have a plumber? And then I do think that we probably need to have someone come look at the roof. Or do you have a painter? So all of those, or a carpet cleaner, all of those people and all of those things that they kind of needed resources for, I would list here. And then I would put I'd draw a little box next to it to signal to myself that that was somebody I needed to send them a resource for. There were also projects on here that they would be doing, whether it was, okay, so we need to power wash the deck and stain it. And we need to paint, you know, the lower level that's, you know, that really just needs to get repainted. I was making a list of all of those projects here as well. I just wouldn't put the little box next to it at this time, because that way when I got back to the office, I knew I didn't need to send them someone for power washing the deck. But when it got closer to, and we said, let's look at listing this in 2 weeks or 3 weeks, I was triggered to say, hey, did that deck get power washed and stained? Because I don't know about you, there's many a times where, especially when you had a lot of transactions going at one time, it was hard for me to remember what were all those projects that I needed to clarify before we went on the market. Because I often would be telling them a price at the end of that listing presentation based on them completing these projects, right? The other thing I would say that was really, really helpful in making sure I captured those projects and an easy to look at quick reference is when you went back to the house for pictures, or when it was close to listing time and I'm dropping off those feature cards, I often would open up my file for them and I would look at all those projects. And when I walked in, you better believe I was going, oh my gosh, look at the deck. Like, what a difference that power washing and staining made. Wow. And had I not made a note of it, I very well, like, it was quite easy, especially when you're going fast and you've got a lot of stuff going on, for you to go in and go like, oh yeah, everything looks great. being able to take the time and point out on those projects that probably took your clients a lot of time, I know meant a lot to the clients. So that was where it was really helpful as well. Okay, again, this is all sounds super, super silly and basic, but it was incredibly helpful. And this got a lot of love and a lot of use after that first initial listing appointment. Okay, so super simple front though, right? Very useful, but super simple. The back was a little more complex. And I did try to convert this from Excel into this. So some of the stuff is it's not lining up the way I like to. So I'm gonna just let that go, guys. Okay, so here at the very top is kind of a little bit about where I would put like a decision day. So during the listing presentation, if we were talking and we were gonna say, okay, when you guys are gonna talk about whether or not now was the time to sell, what's that decision day? When is a good time that you think you'd be ready to make that decision? And I'd make that note there. If they said, okay, I think we should know by Sunday, or give us until Wednesday next week. We got a lot of stuff going on this weekend. And then I would put when I was supposed to follow up in this top left box. Okay, so this was kind of one of my tips or tricks to kind of sometimes nailing the, trying to get them to list right now. I would often suggest, okay, so I would call my stager. I have a listing appointment on Thursday and it's Wednesday. So in addition to getting the listing presentation together, if during that initial call where we went through this orange sheet, they kind of said, hey, yeah, we've started cleaning out all the closets, where we are actually really definitely ready to sell. And it sounded like they were like ready to go. I would call my stager and I would get her availability, and I would fill that out on my sheet here so that I knew on Thursday when I was there, and sometimes, I mean, I got good too, and I had enough going on that I would have her tentatively hold appointments for me. So I would show up Thursday and I would know that my stager was available to come Friday at 6, Saturday at 10 a.m. or Sunday at 1. And it often, if I knew that, and I had that here and I could tell that they were like, ready to go, I could nail down the listing and get them to sign listing paperwork and just say, hey, okay, it looks like you guys were for sure moving. Are you guys comfortable with me? And I mean, I've shown them that I'm on top of things. Okay, so if you want, I know my stager has availability tomorrow at 6, 10 a.m. on Saturday, or 1 o'clock on Sunday. Would you guys want me to nail down? I can text her on my way home and I can nail down one of those times for you. And, often they'd go, yeah, like tomorrow at 6, because then we could use this weekend, honey, to get stuff ready and get stuff going. And again, it's all about speeding it up for yourself too, right? So some of this is very much so about being a little self-serving for your business, but the quicker I can get those appointments set up and those things going, the faster the transaction's moving along too. And you're able to add some grease to the wheels as well. So what I would say then too is that when they go, oh yeah, we'll take that 6 o'clock on tomorrow night, Friday night, I'd say, okay, great. Well, technically, like my broker does not allow me, like I can't send them out until we have listing paperwork. So is it okay if we go ahead and sign listing paperwork tonight? And then I'll confirm her on my way home, and I'll have her reach out to you guys to get set up for 6 o'clock. And I can't tell you the number of times that they were like, yes, come on, let's do this. Because they were ready and I was making it easy on them, and they understood that was the next step. And it was the piece that after walking through the house, we kind of set the tone that there was going to be some of that work. So it was a really great way to get listing paperwork signed, and my admin would love it every time that I came back after a listing presentation and I was like, okay, here's the great, here's all the forms back, here's the yellow form, and here's all the signed listing paperwork. She just would be like, thank you. We don't have to chase down paperwork. Anyhow, okay, same thing with photos. Often if there was times where it was a vacant house or something of that sort, and I knew that the urgency or the ability for them to list quickly was high, I would take the time to call my photographer and say, hey, what is your next available? I'm going Thursday night. It's a vacant property. Do you have anything available for Friday morning or Saturday? So I was trying to just be prepared as much as possible so that I could lock down that listing and get it on the market ASAP. And that's a lot too about having really strong relationships with your vendors, guys. I also was really good about responding back to those vendors and saying, hey guys, yeah, husband wasn't as ready as we thought they were. So I'm not going to need that staging appointment this weekend. Just thank you again for sending me your availability. or for a photographer to say, yeah, I'm not going to need that Friday. You can release it, kind of a thing. But they were always so appreciative to hold those for me because I was very loyal to them and really respectful of their time. Okay. Repair updates timeline. This is kind of where I'd make notes over time on some of the repairs from the front side of that page sometimes. This was a section that was, again, Elizabeth, when I had multiple transactions going, and there was often times that I would have either, 5 active, 5 listings that were active pending, show for backup kind of a thing. And then I also had 3 coming down the pipeline of people getting stuff ready. It was so hard to keep track, like what was it exactly that each person was specified. And the more I could gather that in that initial appointment and or this dates box I would use later at different times, if it was like, we're going to take 3 weeks to get our house ready, I might fill this out by phone closer to when we were actually going to list the property. But showings, I put on here when we were going to start showings. I put in here when it was going to go on the MLS, a date for an agent tour. And sometimes I do agent tour. I kind of pencil in an agent tour and an open house tour prior to going. If it was, again, something I knew that would go on quickly. Keys, when are I going to be picking that up and where? So if they gave me a key that night and I put it on a paper clip, and that way I knew that my admin looked at the form and was like, hey, give me that paper clip with the key on it, please. So that it wasn't something that ended up getting lost in my car, kind of a thing. But otherwise, if it was like, oh shoot, I don't know that we do have an extra key for the house, I knew when we were picking up the key and where. Lockbox, when we were dropping that off, this was more communication between myself and my team. So when the lockbox and the sign was getting dropped off, and a little bit of planning too, guys, right? So okay, well, if that one's going on the market on Thursday, then I need to make sure that Wednesday we're dropping off sign and lockbox. Feature cards, similar there. It's communication with my team of exactly when we're going to be dropping those off. Often at the photo appointment, we would just put them up after the photographer was done. And then sales packets. So I would put out a sales packet that included the seller's disclosure, offer, paperwork, and then like flyers. Okay, so that was kind of important dates. The other client information, how best to contact them, I would check if they preferred to be text, emailed, cell phone kind of a thing. And same with email, fax, guys. Oh my gosh, you can tell that this has been around for a few years. And then this is where I could capture any children if they had shared that information with me and to be able to put it into a CRM. Okay, down here was another section that was really important and a good communication piece for if I was doing it by phone later or if I did it in the listing appointment for me to come back and communicate with my admin. Or just with myself because it was 24 hours later and it was hard for me to remember. This is for setting up showings. So they want to be text, called, or emailed or all. So I would check, and in that meeting or in that phone call, I would be asking them, how do they want to be notified for showings? Text, email, text, call, or email. Time restrictions. So this was also, and it's having been on a listing presentation, we've all been there before. That's a conversation to have with people, right? So how early can showings start? When do they need to end by? If you're working with people that have children or that was a conversation where, and time of year, that end date time was kind of important, right? Because people would go, man, I really we start bedtime about 7 o'clock. And if it was, this time of year where it's still light out at 7, it would be like, well, is it possible that maybe for the first couple of days we could do a little bit later? Like, we could set that last appointment to be where it wouldn't start any later than 7:30 and whatnot. But that was a conversation, and I would put time restrictions for when they started and when they ended. Do note that often I would have a Monday through Friday start and end time, and I would have a Saturday and Sunday start and end time. Length of appointments. So I would have that conversation of, do we really, right now, obviously, all of our appointments are going to be restricted to 45 minutes, but do we want to make it to where there's no longer than an hour? Or are you okay with appointments being an hour and a half? And again, this is a communication tool with me and my client, my admins, and sometimes depending on their experience, that would be where I could say, hey, it's vacant, so it can be a 2-hour window, that's fine. Notice for appointments. So that's another consideration when listing a property is how much notice does your clients need? Do your clients need for a listing or for a showing? So if it was, okay, do you need 2 hours notice that you can get up and out of the house kind of a thing, and sometimes you have to have that conversation of like 24-hour notice isn't necessarily always doable. But that was another piece. And then go, courtesy, appointment required, or listing agent only. Again, this is where I would be having the conversation if it was occupied with my clients to explain the difference between appointment required, courtesy, that kind of a thing. On the right, we would put in a username and password form if there was something specific that I wanted my admin to use. And then this box was for me to communicate whether or not to release that feedback to them immediately, or if I wanted to have the ability to approve it. As we all know, there is the ability to have it just automatically released. And there were sometimes during the listing appointment or phone calls, I could tell that a seller probably needed it to be maybe a little bit of a filter applied just so feelings didn't get hurt. If they were the type that you did not want someone sending, I'm giving you an offer, sending an offer over. If you wanted the ability to kind of filter that a little, I would make it clear whether or not we wanted that information released immediately. So that is the ever amazing Yellow form. Okay, Andy, I will email these out. I have them in a PDF form. And I have them in Excel too. So if you have a preference between Excel and Google Docs, I might spend a little bit of time because this is really driving me nuts that this is not correct up here. But let me know if you have a preference between Excel or Google Sheets. And excellent. Okay, I will send Excel because and I'll send those to you guys. I'll probably send them out PDF and such without my eSadie stuff on there for y'all. Okay, so the other checklist that I had here, and these are dated, so please, but there's something to consider, especially if you've got admins that you're working with, or if you're on a team where you've got multiple people servicing files. I had a buyer checklist, and then I had a seller paperwork checklist. And in that, these weren't color coordinated, guys. I printed them so you could see the red, and that was about it, but there was no fancy color paperwork. Wah, wah. But on here, it was just where if it was supposed to be saved to the client Dropbox, and I wanted it saved as a packet. So all of these documents as a packet, that would be here so that my admin could come in and put a check that she had done that and then shared it with the client. And then this was for if it was in .loop. See, these didn't transfer from Excel. This was in my early days of converting to Google Sheets. And then I had it in here for .loop, and then shared with KW for review. So if it was already in .loop, saved, and then if it had been submitted to compliance was what this column was for. Then the SBS is for signed by seller, signed by all, SBA. And then these are just requirements that we had for forms that were submitted. Same for when the contract came through. Anything in gray was if applicable, so that would be clear to my admin, and it would maybe not always have that form. And then the beloved green sheet here, inspection, and then additional. So it was just a quick way, honestly, too. It was really, really helpful when I had someone else doing my paperwork. And again, I am a paper person, and I know that there's ways to manage this and to do it in .loop or now in our command compliance. But for me, it was really super easy to be able to pick up that, it was another binder, but pick up the binder and flip through and be like, okay, yeah, we've got paperwork, especially when they were new, okay, we're on track, everything's in, here kind of a thing for those. So those are both buyer and seller checklist. And if you don't have these in place right now, this is exactly what everyone is talking about on the different calls, is to get these systems it's a system, these systems and processes in place now, because when the floodgates open up again and it's a million miles a minute, it'll be really helpful to have some of these templates and tools in place that you can go. But wow, all right. I will send out all of the templates then to you all. Let me know if you've got questions or if you've got any troubles with sharing. When I send it to you in Google Sheets, please be sure to make yourself your own copy. And since I'm sharing my screen, I can show you. So you're gonna want to, and you guys use Google Sheets, so maybe it's not a big deal, but be sure to make a copy click here and make a copy so that you have your own and you're not making changes to the master. I always think it's kind of fun though when people go in and make changes to the master. And if somebody else knows a better way to share it so that you guys don't have to do that, please shoot me an email or a text. I'd be happy to do so. All right, thanks for your kind words in the chat, guys. I appreciate you signing on. I hope it was helpful. And Amazon's got great colored paper. I really liked the orange and the green. It was a lot of fun. There was a time where it was pink and blue, and you can probably guess what time in my life that it was like a light pink and a light blue that those forms were. That what was going on in my world. Okay, have a great day, guys. Happy Thursday. Thanks.